Paulette Jaster. Paulette Jaster was born in 1954 and lived with her family on a ranch in Davison, Michigan. Paulette was known as a bright, pretty girl who was well liked. In late August, Paulette left her Davison home to begin studies at Central Michigan University, but she dropped out after the initial semester. Within the next few years, Paulette started suffering from mental health issues. Paulette had recently gone through a breakup with her high school sweetheart and had quit her well-paying job at the Chevrolet plant in Flint, Michigan. By 1974, Paulette was also suspected of using marijuana. In June of 1977, Paulette told the Davison police that people were trying to kill her and, quote, use her mind. When the police petitioned the state, saying Paulette was unable to care for herself, a county probate court deemed her mentally ill and sent her to a state hospital for evaluation and treatment. Paulette's sister believes Paulette may have been suffering from schizophrenia at the time. Today, such a diagnosis might mean medication and treatment, but during the 1970s, mental illnesses were often judged as a character flaw, not as a physical malady or a treatable body chemical imbalance. Less than 2 months after Paulette, then 23, entered the state hospital, she signed herself out. For the next year, Paulette came and went from the family home. In December of 1978, just before Christmas and after a fight with her father, Paulette left Michigan for Florida, where the family had relatives. Paulette would return home in April of 1978 for her mother's birthday. She would leave the family house 2 days after the birthday and would never be seen again. She was last seen carrying an Army-style duffel bag and walking towards Interstate 69, not far from Davison. When her family did not hear from her for a while, they reported her missing. Police wouldn't find anything until almost a year later, when Social Security records showed that in 1980, Paulette earned $319 while working at a Walgreens lunch counter in Mesa, Arizona. There would be no leads after this, and the case grew cold for 3 years, until, in 1983, Carolyn Jaster received a tip that Paulette had returned to Florida and could be in trouble. Several witnesses would claim to have seen her in the last few months, but none of the sightings were ever confirmed. 6 more years would go by, and then, in 1989, Paulette's sister received an anonymous call. The caller wouldn't say anything and hung up the phone every time she picked up. Paulette's sister believes it was Paulette. 7 more years passed, and in 1996, Michigan State Police issued a new nationwide missing person bulletin for any information regarding Paulette. The police would receive a call that claimed that a Blue Earth, Minnesota Jane Doe could be Paulette. However, after forensic testing, she was ruled out. The case would once again grow cold, but her family never gave up searching for her. In 2014, Paulette's siblings began searching missing persons websites, including one called Web Sleuths, which is a forum where registered users can discuss and classify information related to crimes, trials, and unsolved cases, which they then try to solve. The site led them to a woman named Debbie Saunders, who goes by the name of Houston Mom on Web Sleuths. Debbie was able to find a victim of a hit-and-run case from 1980 that had some similarities to Paulette. She submitted her findings to forensic scientist Dr. Sharon M. Derrick, who noticed the similarities as well. But without fingerprints or DNA, Dr. Derrick had to use unorthodox methods to identify the body. A comparison of Jaster's dental charts with the dental work of the hit-and-run victim was a match, but not an exact match because of the lack of x-rays. Then, scanning an autopsy photo, Derrick saw distinctive freckles on the woman's cheek. On January 30th, 2014, after comparing the 2 freckles on the woman's left cheek and one near the right eye to Paulette's, she was able to positively identify the victim of the fatal hit-and-run case as Paulette. It was found that Paulette had hitched a ride from Arizona to Houston and was seen getting out of an 18-wheeler at a truck stop on Interstate 10 shortly before midnight on March 28, 1980. Paulette had no identification on her when a car, driven by an intoxicated driver, swerved into her, killing her. However, the woman had a blue duffel bag that remained in the trucker's cab and stayed in his possession. The duffel bag detail was never followed up on, and the police never collected the bag from the trucker. According to a report from the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the young woman had been hit by Robert S. Cowick, who was 23 at the time. Cowick was arrested and charged with failure to stop and render aid, along with involuntary manslaughter. He pleaded guilty to failing to stop and was placed on probation for 5 years in July of 1980. Paulette had been buried in Houston and was known only as Jane Doe from 1980 to 2014. After the positive identification, her grave, which was previously marked with only a case number, was finally replaced with a plaque identifying her as Paulette Jaster with birth and death dates. William Earl Moult. William Earl Moult was a 40-year-old mortgage broker from Florida. On November 7, 1997, he went to a club in Lantana, Florida. William was not a heavy drinker. In fact, he rarely drank alcohol. He mostly kept to himself at the club, and then left alone in his 1994 Saturn SL around 11 p.m. According to witnesses, he did not appear to be drunk. Before he left the club, William called his girlfriend around 9:30 p.m. to say he would arrive home soon. But William did not make it home that night or any of the nights after. When he did not arrive home, he was reported missing. Police searched for him but were unable to find any clues or any leads as to where he might be. With no leads to investigate, his case grew cold. He remained missing for the next 2 decades. Then, on August 28, 2019, a former resident was looking at his old neighborhood on Google Earth in Grand Isle, Sausalito housing development in Wellington, Florida, when he noticed what he thought was a car in a retention pond. The former owner told the current resident, Barry Fay, that the car was there in a retention pond behind his house and sent screenshots to him. When Fay got home, he looked into the pond behind his house but didn't notice anything, just as he had not noticed for the past 14 months that he'd lived there. Fay called a neighbor who owned a drone with a camera attached, and the footage it returned showed there was a car submerged in the pond. Fay called the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office immediately. When the vehicle was pulled from the water, it was heavily calcified and skeletal remains were found inside of it. Investigators towed the car and the remains to the county medical examiner's office for processing, and 1 week later, the remains were positively identified as belonging to William Earl Moult. Apparently, the vehicle had plainly been visible on Google Earth since 2007, but no one had noticed it until 2019. The police believe that William, while returning from the club, most definitely lost control of his vehicle and drove into the pond. At the time of his disappearance, the housing complex surrounding the pond was under construction, and the car went undiscovered throughout the rest of the construction process. His family finally found closure after 22 years. Grateful Doe. On June 26, 1995, 21-year-old student Michael Eric Hager, who was traveling from Fairfax, Virginia to his mother's home in Inman, South Carolina, picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker with shaggy blonde hair in his Volkswagen van in Virginia. At some point during the drive, Michael fell asleep at the wheel. At 1:30 p.m., Michael's van veered off and crashed into a pair of trees on U.S. Route 58 West in Greensville County, Virginia. Both of them suffered head injuries and died immediately. Michael was identified, but the unknown hitchhiker carried no ID, which made it impossible to identify him. It has been suggested that Michael may have agreed to transport the hitchhiker because of their similar styles of dress, as they both appeared to be fans of the Grateful Dead. Amongst the hitchhiker's belongings, he had a lighter, a few coins, and 2 scalped ticket stubs to a Grateful Dead concert. The concert took place at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. One ticket was for June 24, 1994, and another for June 25, 1995. A note was also found near his body, which read, "Jason, sorry we had to go. See you around. Call me. Carolyn T. and Carolyn O." The note had a phone number with a 914 prefix, but no area code. The number turned out to be a dead end for the police. Since he had no identification, the hitchhiker was deemed Grateful Doe. Fingerprint analysis was also unsuccessful. Due to the severity of lacerations on the hitchhiker's face, mortuary photographs could not be released to the public, although a facial reconstruction was later released. In 2012, another facial reconstruction was created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Days turned to months, and months turned to years, and eventually the case grew cold. Then, 20 years later, across the world in Queensland, Australia, Redditor Layla Betts started getting into unsolved mysteries. She stumbled across the Grateful Doe case where 2 men were killed in a car crash. One man was identified, but the other wasn't. Immediately, Betts, otherwise known as Reddit user Zombie Gray, was drawn to his story. In January 2015, under the username Grey Metal, Layla published a post to Imager titled, "Do you recognize me? I have been without my name for nearly 20 years," in hopes of finding any information about the young man. She also created the Reddit community R Grateful Doe in order to keep track of any possible leads in the case. Thousands of people joined in, and she spent several hours a day moderating the community, replying to comments, contacting law enforcement, and posting updates. Soon she got a message in her Reddit inbox from a guy named Steve. Steve said he recognized the guy in the composite sketches. He thought it looked like one of his old roommates from Illinois, a man named Jason. He only knew him by his first name. The man described Jason as a young, free, hippie surfer. At the time, Jason was working at the local McDonald's and discussed subjects like atheism and hallucinogens. And, much like the deceased hitchhiker, Jason was a major deadhead. The roommate had also said he hadn't seen Jason since 1995. The man supplied photographs of his former roommate, who bore a striking resemblance to that of the reconstructions of the Grateful Doe. Not too long after, the story reached the mainstream media, and a lady named Margarita Evans came forward, stating that the young man in the photos was her son, Jason Callahan, who had been missing for 20 years. On January 12, 2015, Evans finally filed a missing persons report regarding the 1995 disappearance of her son, Jason Callahan. When asked why she hadn't reported him missing in 1995, Callahan's mother said she didn't know which jurisdiction to file the report with due to the nomadic nature of Grateful Dead fans. Due to his nomadic nature, Callahan's family had presumed he'd gone to live on his own, elsewhere. In January of 2015, law enforcement conducted a DNA test to see if Grateful Doe was the same man as Jason Callahan. DNA testing confirmed that the body was indeed that of Jason Callahan. The case was finally solved after 20 years. The Grateful Doe subreddit still exists. Now that its namesake case has been solved, the community features other missing persons cases, several of which have also been solved. Petra Patzicka. Petra Patzicka was a 24-year-old computer science major at a college in Braunschweig, Germany. In July of 1984, with the holidays fast approaching, she planned to spend her time completing her thesis at her parents' house in Wolfsburg, some 23 miles away. While getting ready to leave on July 26th, Petra asked a neighbor to take care of her plants while she was gone, giving no indication that anything was wrong. She then attended an appointment at her dentist office, after which she apparently planned to catch a bus to Wolfsburg. However, Petra never arrived at her parents' home. At first, they thought she'd stayed near school a few days longer than expected, but when Petra did not arrive for her brother Karsten's birthday party 2 days later, her parents reported her missing. An extensive search was carried out for her, but nothing turned up. There was no sign of her at all. She was nowhere to be found on campus, not in her dorm or any common areas. Her professors hadn't seen her, and her friends had not heard from her. It was as if she had simply disappeared. Her case was also featured on a local television program, but still no trace of her was found. After finding no evidence of her, investigators began to suspect that Petra may have been a victim of homicide. The police changed the direction of the case from missing person to a murder investigation. This led to their first break in the case. Just 2 years prior, a 14-year-old girl had been brutally assaulted and murdered in the town of Wolfsburg. The police thought that the two crimes, Petra's disappearance and that of the little girls, were related. As it turned out, the patch of woodland where they found the 14-year-old girl was very close to the bus stop where Petra had supposedly caught the bus on the night of her disappearance. Then, in 1985, a 19-year-old known only as Gunter K., a carpenter's apprentice, was arrested in connection with the teenager's murder. He confessed to killing the 14-year-old. Then, 2 years later, he also confessed to having killed Petra as well. However, authorities started to doubt Gunter's claim. Investigators found no evidence that linked him to Petra's murder. He was eventually only convicted of the murder of the 14-year-old and not of Petra's murder. In 1989, 5 years after Petra's disappearance, she was officially declared dead, even though her body had never been recovered. And for more than 3 decades, her disappearance remained unsolved. Then, in September of 2015, 31 years after and 200 miles away from the place where Petra had been last seen, police were called to the home of an old woman named Miss Schneider to investigate a break-in. Upon arrival, they questioned Miss Schneider about what had happened during the break-in, but when the police asked her for her identification, she was unable to give them any form, no license, passport, or anything. When the police questioned her later that night, it turned out Miss Schneider was actually Petra Pashtika. Furthermore, she produced documents that confirmed it. She admitted that she had planned her own disappearance from Braunschweig, saving some 4,000 Deutschmarks in order to start a new life. After staging her disappearance, Petra had moved to an apartment that she'd rented in a city 35 miles northeast of Düsseldorf called Gelsenkirchen. She then eventually traveled cross-country before finally making her way to Düsseldorf, where she'd been living for 11 years when investigators showed up. Somehow, Petra had gotten away without documentation for over 30 years. She did not have a bank account and even managed to pay all of her bills in cash. Petra had done everything she possibly could to stay off of anyone's radar. This included not socializing with any of her neighbors or coworkers in Düsseldorf. Even after she'd been discovered by police, she didn't show any interest in reuniting with her family. Despite their frantic questioning, Petra would not tell officers why she had disappeared in the first place. Her father had since died. When asked if she wanted to reunite with her mother and brother, she said she did not. Gabriel Nagy. In January of 1987, Gabriel Nagy was living in Sydney with his wife Pamela. Together, the couple had 2 children, Stephen, then 11, and Jennifer, 9. Apparently, the family lived a comfortable life, supported by Nagy's job as a shop fitter. Meanwhile, he was studying to become an accountant. On January 21, 1987, Gabriel called his wife at home and told her he would be coming home for lunch, but he never arrived. Gabriel was the kind of person who always told someone whether he was coming home or not, so this was very strange. The next day, people found Gabriel's vehicle abandoned at the roadside. Apparently, the car was now just a burnt-out shell. Authorities found that Gabriel had withdrawn some money from his account after 2 weeks of his disappearance, and it was found that he had soon after bought camping supplies at a Newcastle store. But then the trail went cold, and for more than 20 years, Pamela and her children were left to wonder what had happened to him. Since he didn't communicate for so long, his family started to believe he was dead. Then, some 23 years after Nagy's disappearance, after trying to crack the cold case for over 10 years, Senior Constable Georgia Robinson decided to get Nagy declared dead. However, Robinson wanted to go through her files again for the last time, and this time she found a clue in the form of a Medicare card registered to a Gabriel Nagy. Apparently, a Gabriel Nagy had recently undergone operations on his eye, and Australia's health authority Medicare had documented the procedures. Soon, the records were traced to a man also known as Ron Saunders, who had recently begun using the name Gabriel Nagy. When the police questioned him, Nagy told them that he had no idea what she was talking about. Police were certain that the man was indeed the missing Gabriel Nagy, but that he genuinely seemed to have no memory of anything that had happened. It was soon found that Gabriel had suffered a serious injury at the back of his head, which was the possible cause of his amnesia. At the time, Gabriel was living and working at Mackey's River of Life Church. However, he had spent much of the past 2 decades homeless and wandering from place to place with no real idea of where he came from or where he was going. After doing odd jobs and sleeping on the streets for a long time, a pastor saw something in Nagy and decided to give him the job of a caretaker in his church. Little by little, memories had started to come back to him, and he'd even started to remember his real name after having lived under a pseudonym for decades. The pastor helped Nagy get a Medicare card in his original name, and that's when he was found by police. Nagy was subsequently reunited with his family after 25 years of being missing, and he was delighted to restore his relationship with his family and return to the life he used to live. Esther Lucille Westenbarger was a 51-year-old woman who had just recently moved to Kokomo, Indiana from Fostoria, Ohio, to be closer to her family. She had just gotten a hefty buyout package from Chrysler and was looking to enjoy some time with her family. On November 12, 2009, she went out with some new friends at Hosier's Bar. She parked her gold 2005 Cadillac CTS, bearing Ohio personalized registration plate Ms. Esther, at the bar. She then walked to Miller's Tavern in the area. At around 1:30 a.m., she left the bar and walked on foot towards her car. This was the last time she would ever be seen. The next day, Esther had planned a surprise party for her mother, who was turning 73 on November 14th. However, when the family tried calling her, they could not reach her ahead of the party. They visited her home, but no one was there. She was eventually reported missing. Police launched a search investigation and found that her car was missing as well. The people with whom Esther was bar hopping with were questioned, but to no avail. There would be no updates or any leads in the case for 11 years. Then, on June 17, 2020, Howard County 911 Dispatch Center received a call from a local fisherman stating that they believed they saw a car covered in algae at the bottom of a retention pond. The police pulled out the car from the pond and found human remains inside. The vehicle was identified as a gold 2005 Cadillac CTS, bearing Ohio registration plates Ms. Esther. An autopsy performed by a forensic pathologist confirmed that they were the remains of Esther Lucille Westenbarger. Foul play is not suspected in her death, and it is believed that Esther had too much to drink and accidentally drove her car into the retention pond. Blanca Otero Alvarez was born in Quitilipi, Argentina in 1952. Both her parents were Spanish, and in 1973, her and her 2 brothers, along with their parents, would move back to Salices de Sabero, Spain. Blanca was working as an elementary school teacher in Argentina when she moved to Spain. However, she would have a hard time finding a job as a teacher in Spain, so she decided to change her career and moved to the city of León, where she found a job in Renfe, a railway company in Spain. She would visit her family regularly at their family home. But sometime in 1995, Blanca, then 43 years old, would disappear and never return to her home in León. When her family didn't hear from her for a few days, they decided to visit her home in León. When they arrived at her apartment, they couldn't find her. They asked her friends and colleagues, but no one had seen her. She had left behind all of her belongings in her apartment. However, the family wouldn't report her missing until 2 years later, in 1997. According to one of her brothers, she was not reported missing because their father, quote, didn't want to report her missing. Shortly after she was reported missing, the police located her to be living in Gijón. However, Blanca did not want to contact her family, and as she was an adult, the police could not force her to get in touch with her family. Her mother and the 2 brothers decided to visit her in Gijón. They found out where she was living, but when they arrived at her apartment, she was already gone. The family would not hear from her for the next 8 years. Then, in 2005, Blanca would send a letter to her family with a current photo of herself. In the letter, she said that she was fine and asked for her father to forgive her for leaving. She also wrote that someday she would get in touch with her brothers. Her father would pass away a year later in 2006. Her family hoped that she would get in touch with them soon, but years would pass and they would hear nothing from her, leading them to believe that she may have died. In 2013, one of the brothers found a police sketch of an unidentified middle-aged dead woman found on Camelo Beach, Santander. The unidentified woman was known as La Dama di Camelo and was found in 2001. The family believed the woman to be Blanca, however, a DNA test ruled her out. To this day, La Dama di Camelo remains unidentified. In September of 2020, a 68-year-old woman named Eva was reported missing in Pola de Siero, Asturias, Spain, by her neighbors after not hearing from her or seeing her for a few days. The police tried ringing Eva's doorbell, but no one answered. The door was locked from the inside, indicating that the woman was in the house. They finally broke into the house to find Eva sitting on the floor, unable to move due to a problem in her legs. She was conscious but extremely dehydrated and disoriented. She was transferred to a HUCA hospital. In the meantime, the police tried finding her family to let them know of her condition. However, to their surprise, the identity by which she was known among the neighborhood did not coincide with the data that appeared both in the address and in the UHCA database. Her identity was found to be fake, and her true identity was revealed to be Blanca Otero Alvarez. Blanca had been living in Pola de Siero for years under the name Eva. She had made money by babysitting, taking care of pets, and house cleaning. In the recent years, her health had been deteriorating. Blanca's family has been contacted. Blanca's mother is now 90 years old and lives in a nursing home in Gijón. No information was given on why she initially disappeared or the motivations behind her eluding the grasp of her family for so many years. Charlene Cheryl Hammock was a young 18-year-old woman living with her parents in Thomaston, Georgia. In fall of 1981, Cheryl decided to join a touring fair to earn some money to see the country. She would call her family 3 or 4 times a week after joining the fair. One day, though, she told the family that she had met someone and was planning on moving to Texas. She said she would return at Christmas and that they should leave a gift for her under the tree. Cheryl would stop calling after that, and the family got worried when they didn't hear from her for over a week. She would never return to her family to celebrate the fabled Christmas she spoke of. A few months later, her family received Cheryl's wallet and driver's license in the mail, but with no return address. It was at this point that her mother decided to report her missing to the police. Despite the investigation into her disappearance, the family would receive no updates on her case for years. In October of 1981, the body of an unidentified woman was found beside a small dirt lane entrance to a cornfield in Dixie, Georgia. The victim was covered slightly with freshly cut branches and foliage to hide her. The police determined that she had been stabbed in the abdomen and strangled. There was no identification found at the crime scene. They determined that the victim was a young white woman, about 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing about 105 pounds, with shoulder brown hair and hazel eyes. They estimated that she was somewhere between 18 and 24 years old. Without any leads as to the woman's identity, she was buried in a grave with a headstone which read, "Known only to God." She also had a forensic sketch, which the police drew during the investigation, carved into the slab. Soon, a witness told the police that a motorhome with Alabama license plates had been seen near the crime scene. Police found the motorhome and arrested a man named George Newsom. The motorhome was later found to be stolen from another state. Police searched the motorhome and found a rope that they believed matched the one which was used to strangle the young lady. They also found the knife that was used to murder her. Initially, George refused to cooperate with investigators and said he had nothing to do with the murder. About a week after his arrest, George escaped from the Brooks County Jail and remained a fugitive for 2 years. He was finally caught on January 13, 1983. Upon his recapture, he confessed to her murder but did not disclose her identity. George said that he had met the woman at a traveling fair in Tallahassee, Florida. He said that he had argued with her about another man and killed her in Quitman. He pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. He died on August 10, 1998, from natural causes, but he never disclosed the young woman's identity. The case went cold for 3 decades. The police tried everything to try and identify the woman, but to no avail. Then, on Halloween in 2018, 37 years after her murder, the police received a tip from a woman named Kayla Bishop that the unidentified woman resembled her childhood friend, known to her as Cheryl Hammack. She told them that Cheryl had gone missing in 1981 after traveling with a fair. Kayla had seen the sketch on Facebook and had contacted the police. Following the tip, the police contacted Cheryl's surviving family members, her mother and her sisters. The circumstances surrounding Cheryl's disappearance provided by the family members were consistent with their investigation. The victim's body was exhumed and an extensive DNA test was done for over 1.5 years against the samples provided by Cheryl's family members. On January 9, 2020, the unidentified woman was finally confirmed to be Shirlene Cheryl Hammack. The case was finally solved after 37 years, and her family could finally get some closure. Billy Fiegner was just 22 years old when he went missing. Born in Brooklyn, Billy had been getting into serious trouble living there. In 1984, his parents decided to send him to a horse ranch in California, owned by a former neighbor, in hopes of separating him from bad influences. He lived and worked there for some time, but in late 1984 and 1985, he seemingly disappeared, and the family never got to find out what happened to him. On October 27, 1985, a father and son were walking on a ranch in Parker County in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, hoping to find a place to potentially build a new home, when they stumbled upon skeletonized remains. They immediately notified the police. The remains had been buried in a shallow grave which was partially covered by foliage and had been dug up by animals. The victim was believed to be between the ages of 15 and 20. He had been shot to death, and his clothes, including a pair of gas blue jeans and a Union Bay white fleece jacket, had been strewn across the area. Although clothes were present at the scene, police were unable to find any identification. Sheriff's deputies began checking missing persons reports, but couldn't find anyone matching the description. The victim was given the name of John Parker Doe. Years would go by, and the case grew cold. Over the years, authorities tried everything from facial reconstruction, DNA phenotyping, and genealogical testing to try and identify the young victim. In 2018, DNA was extracted and sent to Parabon Nanolabs to determine the victim's characteristics, which were previously unknown. Through DNA phenotyping, John Parker Doe was finally given a face. He had fair skin, brown or hazel eyes, brown or black hair, 0 or few freckles, and was of European ancestry. This disputed their earlier assumptions that the victim was of mixed race. With the new information, a more accurate 3D facial reconstruction was made, but it still did not generate any leads. CeCe Moore from Parabon Nanolabs uploaded the victim's DNA to GED Match, and over the next 18 months, hundreds of hours were spent to try and find any relative of John Parker Doe. Soon, they found a potential first and second cousin. However, the cousins were found to be adopted and did not know their biological family. The genealogists then tried to find biological parents of the adoptees to be able to find some lead for John Parker Doe eventually. They were able to find a possible birth father of one of the adoptees, but they couldn't confirm it through DNA as the man was already deceased. Fortunately, one of the man's biological sons agreed to take a DNA test, and it was uploaded to GED Match. In a breakthrough, it was found that he was the first cousin to John Parker Doe. CeCe Moore then built a family tree and searched for a male between the ages of 15 and 20 that had gone missing. She found one name in the New York Birth Index that seemed like it could be a match. No records were available for him after he entered his early 20s. His name was Billy Fiegner. Authorities soon tracked down Billy's parents, who were living in Florida. The family provided a DNA sample, and a DNA test confirmed that the victim indeed was Billy Fiegner. Hurricane Sandy had destroyed all the photos from when Billy lived in Brooklyn, but his family was able to provide a photo from grade school. Determined to find answers, investigators tracked down people who had worked with Billy on the California ranch. It was found that while working at the ranch, Billy met a man named Forrest Ethington, who lived in the Dallas area. Forrest convinced Billy to join him and travel to Texas, where they would perform several robberies. The pair pulled some heists together in Texas, and then Billy decided to fly solo. However, Billy got caught and was set to go to court for the robbery. This worried Forrest because Billy might turn on him and reveal his robberies as well. Forrest then told a witness that he was going to try to kill Billy to silence him. Forrest then went to a remote part of the Texas ranch and shot Billy once in the back of the head. The detectives were all set to charge Forrest for Billy's murder. However, in January of 2020, detectives found out that Forrest was already dead. After Billy's death, while performing a heist at a coin shop in Pontego, Texas, one of the members of the crew that Forrest had organized killed the owner of the shop. The FBI caught Forrest after he tried to sell the coins at a coin show. Forrest served 5 years in jail for the crime before appealing in 1991. In 2010, he was again arrested, this time for aggravated assault of a person under 18. He died in prison in October of 2019. Billy's disappearance and his murder was finally solved after 35 years, and although his family did not get the justice they so wanted, they got the closure they deserved. Judith Bello was a 28-year-old woman who lived with her husband and her 3-year-old son on Saratoga Drive in Stanwood, Washington. On December 13, 1993, Judith dropped her son off at daycare and then drove to her job at National Food Corporation in Sylvania. At around 9:30 a.m., she vanished from her job. She did not return back to her home, and she did not pick her son up from daycare. A massive search was carried out. Her car was later found abandoned at the Stanwood post office, but there was no sign of Judith. Judith was close with her family, and they said it seemed very unlikely that she would leave her 3-year-old son behind. Eventually, her profile was featured on 8 of Hearts in the country's deck of cold case playing cards. The police distributed the playing cards to inmates in local jails and state prisons, hoping to find any leads in the case. 3 months after she went missing, Judith's husband and their son moved away and lost contact with the family. Then, on November 23, 2011, almost 2 decades later, a woman claiming to be Judith Bello called the police to inform them that she was alive and well. She said that she called the police after she saw her profile on the website. Through multiple interviews with the woman and the family, police confirmed that the woman indeed was Judith Bello. It was found that Judith had left of her own accord because of marital problems, and she said that she did not reach out to her family because she was scared of her husband and feared he would cause problems for her siblings. She was now living in California and had a new family with 3 children. Judith said she didn't realize she was listed as a missing person until she looked up her name online. The family would be reunited after 18 years. Edgar Latulip was a 21-year-old from Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Edgar was mentally disabled and had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. He was also depressed, and in 1986 he tried to commit suicide. He was admitted to a hospital and had been staying at a group home in Kitchener. On September 2, 1986, he boarded a bus from Kitchener to Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls was about 90 minutes away from Kitchener. He did not arrive back home and was reported missing. He wasn't carrying any luggage with him, and police assumed that he traveled to Niagara Falls to kill himself. Edgar's mother and police searched for him for years, distributing flyers and age progression photos. He would remain missing for 3 decades. Then, in 2016, police got a call from a social worker in St. Catharines, Ontario, that a man had identified himself to be Edgar Latulip. Edgar had been living under a new name in a new city. It was found that Edgar had hit his head in 1986, causing him to lose his memory. A few months before being discovered, he started to have flashbacks of his old life and remembered that his name was Edgar Latulip. He then went to a social worker to tell her that he had remembered his old name and remembered his old life. The social worker Googled the name and found out that a man named Edgar Latulip had gone missing 30 years earlier. A DNA test confirmed that he indeed was the missing Edgar Latulip. He was reunited with his family after over 30 years.
Alex Cooper was a successful salesman, businessman, and family man in his mid-60s. He had a loving wife, 5 children, and several grandchildren. On April 4th, 1987, Alex's daughter and her husband were driving across a bridge when they noticed Alex's car parked at the side of the road. They decided to stop and check up on him. After not finding him in the car, they made their way back to the riverbank as they thought he might be fishing near the river. However, after reaching the riverbank, they couldn't find him anywhere. His daughter became worried as Alex had a heart condition. She immediately called her mother, Margaret, who told her that she hadn't seen Alex in over 24 hours. The family then reported him missing. Police searched his vehicle but did not find anything out of the ordinary. His clothes and fishing equipment were inside of the car. An extensive search for him was carried out. The police learned that Alex had eaten at a restaurant less than a mile from where his car was found. Margaret said that Alex used to carry rolls of cash and always paid in cash. She feared that someone could have seen the large amount of money he had with him and robbed and killed him, while her daughter feared that he had had a heart attack, fell, and drowned in the river. Soon, witnesses came forward and reported to have seen a man resembling Alex hitchhiking in the area near where his car was found. Police suspected he may have left of his own volition. However, his family did not believe this as he had left his credit card and his heart medication at home. A year later, when Alex could not be found, he was declared legally dead. Later, Margaret tried to find Alex's birth certificate, but she could not find it anywhere. She checked the records and found that there wasn't any birth certificate issued in Alex's name. Moreover, there was no record of his existence before their marriage in 1952. The family realized Alex Cooper was not his real name and that he had hidden his past from them all these years. Alex remained missing for the next 4 years. Then, on May 27, 1991, a man was reported missing in Toronto. The man was named David Cooper, and he resembled Alex Cooper. David was reported missing by his friend after not being able to find him during a business trip. Police searched David's apartment and found a photograph of Alex Cooper holding his grandchild in his room. This confirmed that David and Alex were in fact the same man. David/Alex would return 2 days later and found evidence of police being in his home. He asked his landlady, who told him that police had come looking for him after he was reported missing. Alex would leave again and would remain missing for almost another year. He was featured on Unsolved Mysteries TV show, and a viewer living in Hamilton, Canada, recognized Alex and contacted the police. In January of 1992, Alex was located, and he finally told the truth about his past life. He said that as a young adult, he was falsely accused of robbery. As he did not want to go to jail for a crime that he didn't commit, he changed his name to Alex Cooper and went on the run. He married Margaret 4 years later and lived as Alex Cooper for 30 years until his 65th birthday, when he was asked to produce a birth certificate to receive pension. As he did not have one and he couldn't bear to tell his family the truth about his past, he decided to vanish. He was reunited with his family, who accepted him back.
Kamiyah Mobley. On July 10, 1998, at 7 a.m., Shanera Mobley delivered a newborn baby named Kamiyah Mobley at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. But 8 hours later, Kamiyah was abducted by an African-American woman who was impersonating a nurse. She reportedly was dressed in hospital attire and entered the room, assisted and conversed with the mother, and later simply walked out of the room with Kamiyah in her arms. Employees initially believed that the woman who kidnapped Kamiyah was just a member of the Mobley family. After questioning the staff, police found out that the suspect waited in the hospital for 14 hours, repeatedly asking nurses when the baby would be leaving the nursery. She was in Shanera's hospital room periodically from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on July 10th, the day after Kamiyah's birth. The abductor told Shanera that there was a problem with Kamiyah's temperature at approximately 3 p.m. and said that she would return with the infant in about 20 minutes. She then walked out of the University Medical Center with Kamiyah. Neither she nor the child were seen again. The police believed the abductor was between 25 and 35 years old and possibly was wearing a pair of glasses and a wig. She was dressed in a floral blue smock and green scrub pants. She was carrying a large-sized black vinyl or leather bag. Authorities also believed that the abductor had knowledge of the center's building layout and was also familiar with medical terminology. Kamaya's father, Craig Aiken, was in jail at the time of Kamaya's disappearance. He was charged with lewd assault because when Kamaya was conceived, Shanera was only 15 years old and unable to legally consent to sexual intercourse. Aiken was 19 when his daughter was abducted. Shanera had just turned 16. Shanera was awarded a $1.5 million settlement after settling a lawsuit against the former University Medical Center. She has since had 3 other children. Despite extensive searches, there were no leads or any suspects, and the case went cold. Then, in 2017, a girl named Alexis Mangio had an inclination that she may have been kidnapped when she applied for a restaurant job and couldn't find her social security number. When Alexis demanded her social security number from her mother, Gloria Williams, the mother broke down and confessed that she had abducted Alexis when she was just a few hours old from a Florida maternity ward and raised her as her own. Alexis quietly pieced together the majority of her backstory by herself from Google and realized that her name was Kamaya Mobley and her biological mother was Shanera Mobley. She once called her biological mother, but hung up when she heard Shanera's voice. According to court documents, investigators finally cracked the case based on 2 tips: a friend who said Gloria confessed to them, and an individual who claimed to have heard it from Alexis. A DNA sample from the teen was taken and submitted to a crime lab, where it was matched with the original newborn DNA taken the day Kamaya was born. The test confirmed that the teen was in fact Kamaya. Gloria Williams was arrested in January of 2017 on charges of kidnapping and interference with custody. She had a prior history with law enforcement, having previously been charged with check and welfare fraud. It was found that Williams had suffered a miscarriage about a week before she drove the 3 hours from South Carolina to Florida and abducted the baby, Kamaya. It is believed she then passed off Kamaya as her own daughter to family and friends, who said they never suspected a thing. In February of 2017, Gloria pleaded guilty to kidnapping and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Kamaya was then introduced to her biological parents for the first time. However, Kamaya continues to live in Gloria's house and says she looks forward to the day that she is released from prison and still refers to her as her mother. Arthur Jones was a husband and father of 3 who lived in Highland Park, Illinois. He was a commodities trader with a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. On May 11, 1979, he told his wife that he had a sudden meeting to attend to, after which he rushed out the door. He would never come back to his wife and 3 kids. Detectives would later find that he abandoned his Buick near O'Hare International Airport with all of his belongings inside, but found no sign of him. Arthur's wife told police that he had been acting strangely in the days before his disappearance, and, on the day he disappeared, he wasn't dressed for business when he left the house. Police would later find that about 6 months before his disappearance, Jones lost his job at the Board of Trade as a commodities trader and had to sell his seat to pay for gambling debts in excess of $200,000. His wife told Highland Park investigators that, at one point, he lost $30,000 betting on a basketball game. Another time, Jones took out a second mortgage on their home, forging his wife's signature in the process to help fund his gambling. Moreover, his fellow commodities trader Carl Gaimari was recently murdered by 2 men wearing masks. This had impacted Arthur deeply, his wife said. She also said that later in 1979, they scheduled a holiday in California. In fact, they even bought plane tickets. However, Jones subsequently requested that they put off their trip for a week. His wife suspected that he was waiting for a payout of some kind. All of this information led police to believe that Arthur had certainly met with foul play. But, as there was no evidence to support this, the case went cold. Arthur Jones was eventually declared legally dead in 1986. His wife and children collected about $47,000 in Social Security benefits as a result. For decades, his case would remain unsolved until, in 2011, the truth about Jones' disappearance would come out. Arthur was tracked down in Las Vegas after the Social Security Administration, acting on complaints from a man who said his Social Security number was being used by another, approached the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles for help in locating him. Jones had been using a Social Security number that belonged to Clifton Goodnow, a former Waukegan resident. An investigation found that Arthur Jones was living under the name Joseph Richard Sandelli, and he had made stops in Florida and California before settling in Las Vegas, where he had been working as a sports bookie for the last 10 years. Arthur was arrested on 4 felony counts related to identity theft and fraud. Arthur told investigators that he had paid a friend in Chicago $800 for fake documents and a Social Security number belonging to another man, and had then left his wife and children to get a fresh start. Over the past 3 decades, Jones was arrested numerous times using different names in Florida, California, and Nevada, according to investigators who used his fingerprints to track his criminal history. Arthur was charged with fraud, burglary, obtaining and using personal identifying information of another person, and possession of personal identifying information to establish false status or identity. Tamara Milograd. Tamara Milograd was a 15-year-old Australian girl from Melbourne. Tamara was the only girl amongst 3 children, with brothers named Eugene and Nick. On September 18, 1971, Tamara told her mother, Luba, that she was heading out to the Royal Melbourne Show with a friend from school. The Royal Melbourne Show has been going on since 1848, and there are thousands of people that show up to see the incredible sights and, more importantly, the rides and different forms of entertainment, which are usually on display for onlookers to enjoy. After reaching the show, Tamara and her friend got separated, as Tamara said she needed some change for the $5 Australian that she had in her pocket. This was the last time Tamara was seen. As time passed, her friend couldn't find her anywhere. She immediately notified her family, who reported her missing to the police. Despite extensive searches and police efforts, Tamara would not be found. Weeks, months, and years went by, but police could not find any evidence or leads to Tamara's whereabouts. Although the family refused to give up their search for Tamara, the police would find out that at the time of her disappearance, Tamara, according to her relatives, had become a rebellious teenager and was actively pulling away from her family. She had even had an argument with her family about her boyfriend, and it was so bad that Tamara told some of her friends that she wanted to start a new life. This led authorities to believe that Tamara had left of her own accord, but her parents and brothers refused to stop searching for her. There were a few unconfirmed sightings in the months following her disappearance, which gave the Milograd family some hope. One sighting was at the Tarmac Hotel in Laverton. Another witness claimed that Tamara had slept at the Royal Melbourne Show for 2 nights before leaving for St. Kilda and getting a job. Her mother, Luba, went to the areas that she was believed to have been seen, but came up empty-handed. According to Tamara's brother, Nick, they did whatever they could to be able to find her. He shared that they took trips across the interstate searching for her, going on wild goose chases, even hiring a private investigator, but unfortunately, they did not get any closer to the truth. Over the years, the Milograd family prayed that Tamara would come back to them. Years would pass and the case would grow cold. 17 years after Tamara went missing, her father died, never knowing what had happened to his daughter. But on his deathbed, he had begged his family to never give up trying to find his only daughter. He also told his wife, Luba, to never stop searching. In 2010, the AFP's National Missing Person Coordination Center worked with the Milograd family to feature her case during the National Missing Persons Week. Then, 44 years later, in 2015, 39-year-old Karina Russell was searching on the internet when she came across the AFP's Missing Persons website. Karina had been searching for information about her mother, Pauline Tammy Russell, who had died in a car crash in June of 1976. Karina's father was also in the crash, but survived. As Karina got older, she began to ask more and more questions about her mother, and, finding only few answers, started investigating herself. Her digging would later reveal that her father and mother were never married, as Pauline was unable to obtain a birth certificate. It wouldn't be until 2015 when Karina, by chance, clicked on the AFP's missing persons website that she found a woman's profile who bore a striking resemblance to her mother. The profile she found was that of Tamara Milograd. Not only did Tamara look like her mother, but she also shared the same birthday and had a father named Alexander. Karina decided to get in touch with the National Missing Persons Coordination Center to try and see if the woman in the photo could be her very own mother. Following a DNA analysis, it was confirmed that Pauline and Tamara were the same person. An incredible 44 years after Tamara had mysteriously disappeared, 90-year-old Luba would finally find out what happened to her daughter. Not only did Tamara walk away from her entire family, she had moved to another area in Victoria, changed her age from 15 to 18, changed her name to Pauline Tammy Russell, and had had 2 kids before tragically dying in a car crash. Luba, Eugene, and Nick would finally meet Tamara's daughter, along with their great-grandchildren. Marcia Honch and Elizabeth Honch. On September 28, 1995, New Britain police officers on patrol just after midnight spotted a sleeping bag behind the CT Beverage Mart in a shopping plaza on Hartford Road, just down the street from Corbin's Corner and the West Farms Mall. When they opened the sleeping bag, they found a young woman's body wrapped in the blanket and in a plastic garbage bag. She had been killed with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Just 1 week later, the body of another woman was found 40 miles away in Tolland State Forest in Massachusetts. She had also died from a gunshot wound. As days went by, police waited to receive a missing persons report, something that would help them identify the woman. Both victims had no identification on them, and all efforts to identify them failed. Investigators were able to lift a palm print from the plastic garbage bag that held one of the women, but unlike fingerprints, there was no database for palm prints, so the function of the print would only serve to match to an existing suspect. Detectives shared descriptions of the woman, along with photographs of their clothing, with the public, in hopes of identifying them. They reviewed missing persons cases from across North America, but they had no luck and the case soon grew cold. In January of 2011, with the help of forensic testing, investigators were able to prove that the 2 bodies were mother and daughter. This lent to the idea that the murders were not only linked, but likely carried out by the same killer, who was still at large. Even though police were able to determine that they were mother and daughter, they still did not know their identities. In 2014, police officers in New York received a phone call from someone claiming that her relatives, Marcia and teenager Elizabeth Honch, had gone missing 19 years earlier. The family had been looking for them without getting authorities involved. The caller told police that Marcia's husband, Robert Honch, had told them that he, Marcia, and Elizabeth were moving to Australia to start a new life. The call prompted Massachusetts, New Britain, and New York investigators over a series of days to interview several relatives. Detectives took DNA samples from one relative to confirm a family connection to the 2 unidentified bodies. It was found that Honch had never moved to Australia. He wound up in Ohio, where he met the woman that would become his bride, Cheryl Tyree, at a Christian truck stop. The 2 truckers married and settled in Dalton, Ohio. They went on to have 3 children. Cheryl did not want to change her last name to Honch, so Robert changed his surname to Tyree. The name change made it difficult for Marcia's worried relatives to locate Robert Honch through internet searches over the years. It was through Robert's brother and sister-in-law that the relatives searching for Marcia and Elizabeth finally connected with Cheryl. They communicated with Cheryl for several years. In one conversation, Cheryl conveyed that Robert had told her that he had had no other marriages, no children, was an only child, and that his parents were dead. One relative spoke to Robert in November of 2013 about Marcia and Elizabeth. He told the relative that Marcia had met another man and took off, taking Elizabeth with her. When the relative probed deeper, Robert said that he had amnesia. In 2014, after the relative contacted the police, detectives questioned Honch, and he said that something must have happened in 1995 to make him lose touch with all of his family, but he could not remember the event. He said there were a lot of things that he could not remember since 1995. Investigators found that the palm print found at the crime scene matched Robert's. Authorities said that the examination of items found near Elizabeth Honch's body connected him to the scene. More evidence pushed authorities to finally arrest Robert Honch for their murders in 2014. He was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole.
Lula Cora Hood. In 1970, a single mother named Lula Cora Hood left her home in Galesburg, Illinois, after a family argument and never returned. She left behind her 15-year-old daughter. Cora suffered from mental health problems and was in and out of the children's lives even prior to her disappearance. But this time, she never returned to her family, who believed they would never see or hear from her again. There were no leads, no tips, no sign of what had happened to her. She simply vanished. Then, 15 years ago, mushroom hunters found human remains in a Galesburg brickyard. After making a facial reconstruction, detectives believed that the bones belonged to Lula. However, they were unable to confirm this through DNA analysis, as testing on bones could not be done at that time. Nonetheless, Cora was assumed dead, and the family buried the remains and held a memorial service to say goodbye. It seemed as if the mysterious vanishing had at last been solved. For 13 years, that grave would be considered to be Lula's, and the mystery would be case closed, until 2009, when a fresh DNA analysis showed the remains interred 15 years ago were not those of Lula's at all, and belonged to another unidentified individual. After DNA ruled out Cora as a match for the remains, police reopened their investigation with an online database search using her first and middle names and her date of birth. Authorities were able to discover that an 84-year-old woman living in Florida was in fact the long-missing Lula Hood, and she had had a new family, eventually having 14 children. Even though Cora did not remember her daughter after all these years, they eventually reunited. Incidentally, in 2013, the female remains were finally identified as another missing woman named Helen Ruth Alps. Wendy Von Heuben. 16-year-old Wendy Von Heuben lived in Woodstock, Illinois with her family. She was dating a 19-year-old boy named Jesse Howell, who had recently moved into his own home. On February 22, 1997, Wendy told her parents that she was staying over at a friend's house. However, in reality, Wendy and Jesse were running away, after Jesse promised to take her around the world. When Wendy didn't come home the next day, her parents reported her missing. They later learned from her school that she had skipped classes up to a week prior to her disappearance. Wendy and Jesse went on a trip along with another couple. During the trip, they slept in their friend's car and stopped in different states. They ended up in Bradenton, Florida, where they parted ways with the other couple. Shortly after, they ran out of money and lived under a bridge near Dade City for a few days. On March 19th, Wendy called her parents and asked for $200 for a bus ticket back home for her and Jesse. A few days later, Jesse called his parents from a nearby truck stop. He said they were on their way home. However, 2 days later, on March 23rd, Jesse was discovered bludgeoned to death near the railroad tracks in Marion County, Florida. He had been struck from behind, and there was no evidence of a struggle. There was still money in his pocket and a half-smoked cigarette on the ground. A small drop of blood on his jacket was believed to belong to Wendy. However, Wendy was nowhere to be seen. Several weeks later, on June 4th, Wendy's parents received a call from Wendy in which she said, "It's me, Wendy," and then hung up. She then called again and told her father that she was at a gas station in Kankakee, Illinois. However, the conversation was so short that Wendy's father was not even sure if it was actually her. Police tracked the phone to a Phillips 66 gas station. After viewing surveillance videotape, they spotted a teenage girl that matched Wendy's description. Her parents watched the tape and agreed the girl was Wendy. Police estimated that the tape was filmed within minutes of the phone calls. Some local drifters told police that Wendy was traveling with a one-legged railroad car rider known as Bob.
who has since been identified as Bobby Ray Taylor. In April of 1998, the drifter named Bobby Ray Taylor was located. He denied ever being with Wendy, and it was determined that he was not involved in the case. In July of 2000, Angel Resendez, also known as the Railroad Killer, confessed to killing Wendy and Jesse. He claimed he met Wendy and Jesse on March 21, 1997, in a large railway yard in Baldwin, Florida, where hobos and the homeless are known to live. Sometime that night, they got on a grain car heading south. Wendy and Jesse began asking Resendez where they could get jobs without having proper identification. He told them he was going to work the orange fields and told them he could show them where they are. By March 23rd, they had traveled about 85 miles when the train stopped just short of Ocala. Resendez got off and Howell followed him. Resendez then took a rubber hose lined with heavy metal that is used to connect rail cars and hit Howell over the head, killing him with 1 or 2 blows. Resendez said he then got back on the train alone and he and Wendy went on. Wendy didn't know what had happened to Jesse at this point. Resendez told investigators he and Wendy got off the train at Oxford, where he tied her up, then choked her to death with his bare hands about 35 feet from the tracks. He said he covered her body with a military jacket he was wearing and a blanket. Resendez led police to Wendy's remains, which were found 15 miles from the spot where Jesse was found. DNA and jewelry found on the remains confirmed her identity. Resendez confessed to at least 9 other murders. Police believe he was responsible for at least 15 murders dating back to 1986. He was executed in June of 2006. Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller. On the evening of May 29, 1971, 17-year-old Cheryl Miller and 17-year-old Pamela Jackson were on their way to a high school party in Vermillion, South Dakota, driving a beige 1960 Studebaker Lark. The car was Cheryl's grandfather's. The girls stopped at a local church and talked to some boys after visiting Cheryl's grandmother in the hospital earlier that day. The boys were going to the same party Cheryl and Pamela were. They agreed to follow the boys to the party in their own car. However, the boys missed a turn and accidentally drove past the location of the party. When they turned around, they no longer saw the Studebaker's headlights. They figured the girls had simply lost the nerve to attend the party. The celebration went on, but the girls in the Studebaker would not be seen again until 2013. In the following weeks after the girls' disappearance, volunteers and law enforcement officers searched the gravel pit, surrounding roads, and even the nearby Missouri River. But their efforts yielded nothing, and the mystery persisted year after year for more than 4 decades. Authorities had their theories about the girls' disappearance. At first, they believed the girls to be runaways because of their ages. Others thought that they had run away to a hippie commune in California. Soon, a man named David Lycan, already serving a prison sentence on unrelated charges, was indicted for murder in the deaths of Miller and Jackson in 2007. However, the charges were dropped after it was found an inmate faked his confession about Lycan's involvement in the case. Then, on September 23, 2013, a fisherman who was fishing by South Dakota's Brule Creek noticed 2 wheels sticking out from the creek's embankment. Investigators recovered a car from the embankment, which was caked with mud. The location of the creek is in an area that is rarely traveled. It is 30 miles east of Vermillion, almost right on the Iowa border. Record flooding, followed by a drought, is what brought the upside-down car into view. Days later, it was reported that there were 2 sets of skeletal remains found inside the car. The remains were later confirmed to be those of Miller and Jackson. According to officials, the victim's vehicle was stuck in 3rd gear, the lights were on, and their skeletal remains were in the cabin. One of the tires on the car was damaged. The car keys were found in the ignition. Investigators also recovered Miller's purse, which contained her driver's license, photos, and notes from her classmates. Those factors pointed to an accident, and the case was finally closed after 43 years. Lucy Ann Johnson. In 1965, Lucy Ann Johnson, mother to son David and a daughter Linda, vanished. Her husband, Marvin Johnson, reported her missing from their home in Surrey, British Columbia, near Vancouver, Canada, in 1965. But upon further investigation, Police were alarmed to find that, after talking to various neighbors, it seemed Lucy had not been seen since September of 1961. Based on witnesses reporting that Marvin had been digging a septic tank in the field a few months prior, the Surrey Royal Canadian Mounted Police dug up the yard of the home, which was located near 103rd Avenue and 145A Street in North Surrey, but they found nothing. Lucy Ann Carville, born in 1935 in Alaska, met her first husband, Marvin Johnson, and married him in Blaine, Washington, later moving to Surrey. After reading a profile on her mother, considered British Columbia's oldest missing persons case, Linda Evans, Lucy's daughter, decided to take matters into her own hands. Knowing that, had her mother still been alive, she would be in her late 70s, Linda Evans committed herself to finding her mother before she herself got too old. Linda's father had remarried after her mother's disappearance and later passed away in the late 1990s, and Linda's brother, David, died as a teenager, so Linda knew she was the last chance at finding out the truth. Utilizing the bare-bones facts she knew, Linda was only 7 or 8 years old when her mother disappeared, Linda set out on her own investigation. She posted an advertisement in a local newspaper, the Yukon News, near her mother's birthplace, giving her mother's name, birth date, birthplace, and physical description, 5'5", olive complexion, dark hair, as well as her grandparents' names. Linda hoped to make contact with anybody who might know her mother's fate. In 2013, shortly after posting the ad, she received a call from a woman from the Yukon in the Northwestern Territory of Canada next to Alaska, who believed that Linda's mother might be her mother as well. Linda was shocked to find that her mother was not only alive, but that she had a new family, with 3 sons and 1 daughter. Weeks later, Linda flew 1,200 miles from Vancouver to the Yukon Territory where her mother now resides. When asked why she vanished, Johnson claims that her husband Marvin, Linda's father, deceased in the late 90s, was abusive and unfaithful and unscrupulously banned her from the house without informing the children. Linda is not sure if she believes the story, as it seems highly unlikely that a mother would leave her children so voluntarily and neglect to make contact after so many years. Linda was skeptical at first, but she ended up believing her mother, if for the better of the relationship. Linda, now in her late 50s, is considering moving to the Yukon Territory to live near her mother and make the most of their years left together.